Hello and welcome to this session. This session is all about the complex numbers, introduction of engineering math for EE. And I am Engineer Anthony T. Reyes, a faculty of Bulacan State University College of Engineering, specifically Electrical Engineering Department. So, let's start. When we say complex numbers, it is defined as complex numbers written in the form of a plus bi, where a is the real part and b is the imaginary part. So let's say you have the complex number a plus bi. A is what we call the real part of the complex number, and b is what we call the imaginary part of the complex number. Now, yung palatandaan if it is real or imaginary, kapag walang kasamang I, that is real part. Pero kapag may kasamang I, that is imaginary part. Wherein I is equal to the square root of -1. It cannot be evaluated, kaya designated as I. Now, for example, you have to identify the real and the imaginary part of every complex numbers given. Let's say you have complex number A, you will have 6 plus 7i. The real part of complex A is 6, and the imaginary part of complex A is 7. Now, number 2, let's say you have complex B, -4 plus 9i. The real part is -4, and the imaginary part is 9. While complex C, you have -2 minus 5i. The real part is -2, and the imaginary part is -5. Then for complex D, which is 1 minus I, the real part is 1 and the imaginary part is -1. Then for the last complex, which is E, given as 8i, you will notice na yung term is just composed of imaginary part. Therefore, the real part is equal to 0 and the imaginary part is equal to 8. Now, after identifying the real and the imaginary part of the complex number, we have the complex numbers representation. Ang complex numbers representation, let's say you have a plus bi. A is noted as the x and y is noted as b, or rather b is noted as y. So, i-represent natin siya sa x and y axis. So, si x, yun yung value ni A. Tapos si y, yun yung value ni B. So, let's say you were given point A, which is 2 and 3. That can be represented as complex A, which is 2 plus 3i, since x is 2, y is 3. Then another point, let's say you have -4 and -1, it can be represented as b equals -4 minus I. Next point is -2 and 1. It can be represented as -2 plus I. Another one is point P, which is 2 and -2. It can be represented as 2 minus 2i. Next is E, which is 1 and 0. The real part is 1 and the imaginary part is 0, so it can be represented as E equals 1. Then the last point, let's say you have point F, which is 0 and 4. It can be represented as F equals 4i. Since x is 0, so the real part is 0, then you have the value of the imaginary part. So your F complex is just for I. Next, we have the forms of the complex numbers. We have 4 forms of complex numbers. First is the rectangular form, which is in the format of z equals a plus bi. Next form is the polar form, wherein we write it as z equals r at angle theta. Third is the trigonometric form, which is z equals r cosine theta plus r sine theta I. Then the last form is the exponential form, which can be equated to z equals r e raised to theta I. So how can we convert between forms? So let's say you were given a rectangular form, which is z equals a plus bi, to be converted into polar form, which is z equals r at angle theta. So you know that a is your x and b is your y. So if you draw dun sa Cartesian coordinate plane, you will have a as the horizontal, then b as the vertical. Since this is right angle, so it can have the hypotenuse, which is represented as r. So you also have the theta between a and r. So para makompute natin si r, you can have the Pythagorean theorem, which is r equals the square root of the a squared plus the b squared. Now, para makompute naman natin yung direction ni r with respect to a, so that is arctan of b over a. But you have to take note that you have to locate the quadrant of the point. Since you have 4 quadrants, kailangan alamin mo kung saang quadrant located yung point natin or yung complex number. Then next one, yung theta na makocompute natin, kapag i-represent nyo na sa polar form, theta must be always from the positive x-axis. So there's an instance na ang makocompute mo ay galing sa negative x. So bago mo siya ilagay sa polar form, dapat converted na siya wherein yung theta mo must start from the x-axis. Then taking note that the theta must be in degrees, always in polar form. So kapag polar form ang usapan, matik po dapat na degrees yung theta. Then the direction of the theta, kapag ang rotation mo ay counterclockwise, which is from positive x-axis paikot, that is positive theta. But if the rotation is clockwise from positive x-axis pababa, the sign of the theta is negative. Now, how about from polar form, which is c equals r angle theta, to be converted into trigonometric form, which is c equals r cosine theta plus r sine theta I. So knowing that r is the hypotenuse, then the theta is the direction of your hypotenuse. You have the a as the horizontal, then b as the vertical. So you know that in rectangular form, this is your a and this is your b. A is yung walang kasamang I, which is the real part. Then b is yung may kasamang I, which is the imaginary part. So paano natin makocompute si a? You have the cosine theta. Ang cosine theta is adjacent over the hypotenuse. Our adjacent here is a and the hypotenuse is r. So our cosine theta is equivalent to a over r. So para makuha natin si a, that is r cosine theta. So this is your A. Then for the sine theta, that is opposite over the hypotenuse. The opposite of the theta is b over the hypotenuse. So you will have sine theta equals b over r. Then computing b, that is r sine theta. So therefore your b here is the r sine theta. Knowing that a is the real part and b is the imaginary part. Then another conversion is from polar form, which is again z equals r angle theta, to be converted into exponential form, which is z equals r e raised to theta I. The r in the polar form is said to be equal to the r of the exponential form. But the theta in polar form is always in degrees. And the theta in exponential form must be always in radians. So you have to convert from degree to radian. So if you were given a polar form, you have the degree angle, tapos i-convert natin into exponential form, your theta must be converted into radian. Then the conversion from degree to radian, you were given the degree multiplied to pi over 180, then you will get your theta in terms of radian. So for example, you have to find the equivalent other forms of the given complex number. You were given complex A, which is equal to 4 plus 3i. This is rectangular form. So you have three other forms. You have to get the polar form, the trigonometric form, and the exponential form. First, identify your A and B. A is equal to 4 and B is equal to 3. Now you can get your R kasi meron na tayong values ni A and the B, wherein R is equivalent to the square root of A squared plus the B squared. So therefore, you have r equals the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared. Your r is equal to 5. Now the theta is equivalent to arctan of b over a, wherein you have the arctan of 3 over 4. The value of your theta in degrees, that is 36.87 degrees. So sabi ko kanina, you have to locate first yung location ni complex number bago mo ilagay sa format ng polar form. Kailangan galing sa positive x-axis. The location of your 4 plus 3i is in the first quadrant. So kapag nilocate mo si r at nilocate mo si theta, the 36.87 degrees, that is from the positive x papunta kay r. So therefore, yung value na compute mo kay arctan is the one you will use in the form of r angle theta. So our polar form is 5 at angle 36.87. Then for the trigonometric form, the value of our r is 5 and the value of our theta is 36.87. So you have the trigonometric form as 5 cosine 36.87 plus 5 sine of 36.87 I. Now you have the theta in degrees. Tama? Then you will have to convert it into radian para mahanap natin yung equivalent exponential form. So you were given 36.87 multiplied by pi over 180. So the theta in radian is equal to 0.6435. So to have your exponential form, you will have the r, which is 5, then e raised to 0.6435 I, and that is your exponential form. Next is example number 2, which is complex b equals negative 4 plus 3i. So this is also rectangular form. So you have to identify its polar form, trigonometric form, and the exponential form. Identifying your a, which is negative 4, and b, which is 3, you can now compute for the r, which is r equals negative 4 squared plus 3 squared. R is also 5. Then for the theta, you will have your arctan of b over a, wherein b is 3, a is negative 4. So the computed theta is negative 36.87, but the location of our complex b is in second quadrant, and the location of your negative 36.87 is from negative x-axis. So yung 36.87 natin nandito mula kay negative x-axis, but we need kay polar form ay galing sa positive x. So you need to compute for the theta from the positive x. So this straight line is composed of 180 degrees. So ima-minus lang natin yung computed natin na theta, which is 36.87, to have the new value of theta from the positive x-axis, which is 143.13. So the equivalent polar form of complex b is 5 at angle 143.13. Then for the trigonometric form, you have 5 cosine of 143.13 plus 5 sine of 143.13 I. Then since you have already 143.13 degrees, to be converted into radian, you have 143.13 multiplied to pi over 180. The value of your theta in exponential form is 2.498 rad. So your exponential form is b equals 5 e raised to 2.498 I. Next example is complex c. Let's say you have 4 minus 3i. This is also rectangular form. Then getting your polar form, trigonometric form, and exponential form. A is 4, b is negative 3. Computing for the r, that is the square root of 4 squared plus negative 3 squared, you will have r equated to 5. Then for the theta, that is arctan of b over a, that is arctan of negative 3 over 4, which is computed to be also negative 36.87. But if you locate your complex number c, the location of the complex c is fourth quadrant. So pag nilocate natin si r at nilocate natin si theta, you have from the positive x clockwise, that is negative 36.87. Since your angle is already from the positive x with a sign of negative 36.87, so you can use that angle already. So the polar form is 5 angle negative 36.87. Then for the trigonometric form, you have 5 cosine of negative 36.87 plus 5 sine of negative 36.87i. To simplify the equation, cosine of negative is also cosine of the positive angle. So you can have your 5 cosine of the positive 36.87, that is the same value with 5 cosine of negative 36.87, while the 5 sine of negative 36.87 can be represented as negative 5 sine of 36.87i. Now you have the angle negative 36.87 degrees to be converted into radian, which can be multiplied into pi over 180. The value of the theta in radian is negative 0.6435 rad. So the exponential form is 5 e raised to negative 0.6435 I. Example number 4, you have negative 4 minus 3i. This is also rectangular form. You have to get the polar form, the trigonometric form, and the exponential form. A is negative 4 and B is negative 3. Computing for the r, that is the square root of negative 4 squared plus negative 3 squared. So r is also 5. Then for the theta, that is arctan of b over a. So you will have the arctan of negative 3 over negative 4. You will notice that the computed theta is 36.87, but the location of your complex d is at the third quadrant. Then if you locate the r and you locate the theta, that is from negative x-axis. So your 36.87 is from the negative x-axis. So to compute for the real theta in polar form, you have to get the theta from the positive x, and the rotation is clockwise. So therefore, your theta must be in negative. So you will have negative, then the total is 180, subtracting 36.87 rather. Your theta from the positive x is negative 143.13. So the polar form is 5 angle of negative 143.13. Then for the trigonometric form, you have d equals 5 cosine of negative 143.13 plus 5 sine of negative 143.13i. Cosine of the negative angle is also cosine of the positive angle, so it can be rewrite as 5 cosine of the 143.13. But sine of the negative angle is equal to the negative sine of the positive angle. So 5 sine of negative 143.13 can be rewritten as negative 5 sine of 143.13 multiplied to I. Then the given or the computed negative 143.13 degrees to be converted into radian, multiplying it to pi over 180, you can have the value of the theta as negative 2.498 rad. So the exponential form is 5 e raised to negative 2.498 I. Next example is example number 5. The given is complex f equals 10 e raised to negative I, which is in the format of exponential form. Now you have to get the polar form, the trigonometric form, and the rectangular form. So identifying the components, r is equal to 10, then the theta is equal to negative 1, but the theta is in radian. So you have to convert the theta into degrees kasi yun yung kailangan natin sa polar form. So negative 1 multiplied to 180 over pi, the new theta is negative 57.3 degrees. So the polar form, knowing that r is equal to 10, you have 10 at angle negative 57.30. Okay, so for the trigonometric form, since you already have your polar form, that is 10 cosine of negative 57.3 plus 10 sine of negative 57.3. Cosine of the negative theta is also cosine of the positive theta. So you will have 10 cosine of positive 57.3. And sine of the negative theta that is equivalent to negative sine of the positive theta. So the second term is negative 10 sine of the positive 57.3 I. That is your trigonometric form. Now, knowing that this part is your A, that is 10 cosine of 57.3, A is equivalent to 5.4030. Then this part is your B. So you have B as negative 10 sine of 57.3. So you will have B as negative 8.4147. So you will have the rectangular form as 5.4030 minus 8.4147i as your rectangular form. Okay, after familiarizing yourself from the conversion of one form to another form of the complex number, next topic is we have the operations of the complex number. Now, for the operation, we have the addition and the subtraction of the complex number. Okay, let's say you have complex A as equal to A1 plus B1I, wherein complex B is equal to A2 plus B2I. For the addition of the complex number, let's say you have to add complex A and complex B. Now you have to add both real part. So the real part ni A is A1 and the real part of B is A2. Then you have to add the same imaginary part. So B1 for the A, then B2 for the B, and that is your imaginary part. Then for the subtraction, ganun din yung treatment, real part sa real part, then imaginary part sa imaginary part. So you will have A1 minus A2 plus B1 minus B2. And that is your imaginary part. So bakit siya naka-plus? Siyempre, you have to evaluate first yung A minus B. So this is A minus B of the real part and this is A minus B of the imaginary part. Next thing or next operation is we have the multiplication in rectangular form. So let's say you have complex A again as A1 plus B1I, then B as A2 plus B2I, then C as a scalar quantity that is pure real, which is a real number. So let's say you have to multiply scalar to complex number. So C multiplied to A. So let's say you have C multiplied to A1 plus B1I. All you have to do is to distribute the scalar quantity to each and every component of the complex number. So CA is equivalent to C A sub 1 plus C B sub 1 multiplied to I. So hindi siya affected. Still, this is your real part and this is your imaginary part. But if you're going to do complex to complex number, let's say you have complex A multiplied to complex B. So you will have the quantity of A1 plus B1I multiplied to the quantity of A2 plus B2I. You will have to do the FOIL method of the binomial to binomial multiplication. So the first item is A1, A2. The outer is A1, B2I. The inner is B1, A2I or just A2, B1I. Then the last is B1, B2, then I squared. Knowing that I is equivalent to square root of negative 1. So if you square both sides, you will have I squared. So pag in-square natin si square root, makakancel lang si square root. So the value of your I squared is negative 1. So this one can be replaced by negative 1. So this term will be negative b1, b2. Mawawala na yung I. So therefore, kapag wala na siyang kasamang I, that is considered to be real. So your simplified complex A multiplied to complex B, since real na to and this sign is negative, so pwede ko siyang isama dun kay A1, A2. So the total real part of the complex number is A1, A2 minus the B1, B2. Plus, this is both imaginary, so pwede nating pagsamahin. So that is A1, B2 plus A2, B1 multiplied to I, since that is your imaginary part. Next operation is the multiplication, but in polar form rather. So let's say you have complex A as R1 at angle theta 1, then complex B is equal to R2 at theta 2. So you have to get A, B. Equated ngayon siya sa quantity of R1, angle theta 1, multiplied to the quantity of R2, angle theta 2. So all you have to do is to multiply both R, which is R1 and R2, then add the 2 theta. So you will have theta 1 plus the theta 2. Next is the division in rectangular form. So you were given complex A, complex B, and C as your scalar quantity. So let's say you have scalar to complex. So you will have A divided by C. So you will have A1 plus B1I all over C. So pwede nating i-distribute si C as the denominator of each and every component of the complex number. So this can be represented as A1 over C plus B1 over C multiplied to I. But if you will encounter complex divided by to complex, let's say you have A over B, you will have A1 plus B1I all over A2 plus B2I. You have to be familiar with the conjugate. When we say conjugate, you have to change the sign of the imaginary part. How will we do that? If you were given complex C as A plus BI, then you have to get the conjugate of the complex Z. It can be represented as Z equals A minus BI. So the conjugate of the complex Z is A minus BI, wherein the given Z is A plus BI. So ang gagawin natin to simplify this equation, you have to multiply yung component na to dun sa conjugate of the denominator. So the conjugate of the denominator, since this is plus, you will have minus. So i-multiply natin siya dun sa A2 minus B2I. Ngayon, para hindi affected yung original equation, since mag-multiply tayo sa baba, kailangan mag-multiply din tayo sa taas nung minultiply natin sa baba. Kasi this is equivalent to 1. Hindi maapektuhan yung original equation natin. Ang gagawin lang natin is we will simplify the equation wherein dapat walang imaginary part sa ilalim. Now, if we will do this method, you have to go back to multiplication of the rectangular form. So, i-multiply natin yung taas dito, i-multiply natin yung baba dito. You will have this equation. So, pag minultiply na natin yan at nakuha na natin to, you will now have to note that I equals square root of negative 1 rather. Therefore, I squared is negative 1. Papalitan natin tong last term. yung I squared ng negative 1, so magiging positive yung terms ni B1, B2 for the numerator, then B2, B2 for the denominator. Then you will notice, dun sa denominator, this is negative A2B2I and positive A2B2I. Makakancel to. Ang matitira na lang is A2A2. This is negative kanina. Since sa palitan ng negative to, magiging positive. That is positive B2B2. Since A2A2, that is A2 squared. Then B2B2, that's B2 squared. Negative multiplied to negative, that is positive. Tapos dun sa numerator, this is real part. Since papalitan natin to ng negative 1, magiging positive na yan, mawawalan siya ng I. So this can be considered as real part also. So pwede natin siyang i-add dun kay A1, A2. Then these terms, yung nasa gitna, that is your imaginary part, which is equivalent to A2B1 minus A1B2. Now the last operation is the division in polar form. So you were given complex A and complex B. All you have to do is to get A over B in polar form. So you have R1 angle theta 1 over R2 angle theta 2. So A over B can be R1 over R2. But the angle is theta 1 minus theta 2. Okay, now we will perform examples. We have 5 examples. Given that you have 4 complex numbers, first is A multiplied to C. You have to get AC in polar form. Next is B plus D in rectangular form. Next is BD in polar form. Next is A minus C in rectangular form. And the last item is A plus B all over C minus D in rectangular form. So let's start with example number 1. So example number 1, the items needed is A and C, but your answer must be in polar form. Since A is in polar form already and C is in polar form already, so pwede tayong gumamit ng multiplication in polar form. So AC is equivalent to the quantity of 2 angle 10 multiplied to the quantity of 5 angle 30. So multiplying both are, that is 2 multiplied to 5, then sum of the angles, which is 10 plus 30. Therefore, AC is equal to 10 at angle 40. Next item is B plus D in rectangular form, wherein B and D is already in rectangular form, so we will have to add yung B saka yung D. So pag mag-add tayo ng rectangular form, real kay real, imaginary kay imaginary. So you will have 2 plus 3i plus 1 minus 4i. So real part is 2 plus 1. Then the imaginary part is 3i minus 4i. So you will have B plus D as 2 plus 1 is 3. Then 3i minus 4i is negative I. So you will have B plus D as 3 minus I. Example number 3 is B multiplied to D, which is in polar form. So pwede nating i-convert yung B saka yung D into polar form, or pwede natin siyang i-multiply agad, then the answer must be converted in polar form. So that is 2 ways. So in this case, ang ginawa ko po, minultiply ko muna si B at si D, which is multiplication in rectangular form. So we will now have 2 multiplied to 1, then 2 multiplied to negative 4i, 3i multiplied to 1, then 3i multiplied to negative 4i. Ngayon, i-evaluate natin, that's 2 multiplied to 1, tapos si I squared is negative 1 multiplied to negative, that is positive, so this is positive 12. Then this is negative 8i then positive 3i. Now, to get the BD, that is 14 minus 5i, but that is in rectangular form. So all we have to do is to get the r and the theta para maging polar form. So to get the polar form, you have a as 14, b as negative 5. You will have r equals 14 squared plus negative 5 squared. So the value of the r is 14.87. Then for the theta, you have the arctan of negative 5 over 14. The theta is negative 19.65. Now you have to locate the location of your complex number BD. The location of that is 4th quadrant. So as is yung angle natin na negative 19.67, since that is from the positive x-axis. So the polar form of the complex BD is 14.87 at angle negative 19.65. Then example number 4, you have a minus c in rectangular form. All you have to do is to subtract a's c. Then you have to convert your answer into rectangular form. Or pwedeng i-convert natin si a at saka si c into rectangular form, then saka tayo magsusubtract. In this case, I will do convert a and c from polar to rectangular. So simulan natin kay complex A. R is 2, then angle is 10. So for the A, that is 2 cosine 10, which is equivalent to 1.97. Then for the B, that is 2 sine 10, which is equivalent to 0.35. Therefore, the rectangular form of complex A is 1.97 plus 0.35i. Then the A of the complex C, that is 5 cosine 30, equivalent to 4.33. B is 5 sine 30, which is equivalent to 2.5. Therefore, complex C is 4.33 plus 2.5i in rectangular form. Since you have A and C both in rectangular form, pwede na natin siyang isubtract. Then, ang kalalabasan na ni A minus C is already in rectangular form. So, subtracting the two components, you will have 1.97 plus 0.35i minus 4.33 plus 2.5i. You will now have 1.97 minus 4.33, that is negative 2.36. Then 0.35 minus 2.5, that is negative 2.15i. So therefore, A minus C is equal to negative 2.36 minus 2.15i. Then the last item, which is example number 5, you have to get A plus B all over C minus D, wherein your answer must be in rectangular form. So converting A from polar to rectangular, so yung kanina, A equals 2 cosine 10, wherein equivalent to 1.97. B equals 2 sine 10, which is equivalent to 0.35. Therefore, complex A in rectangular form, that is 1.97 plus 0.35i. Since naka-rectangular na si A at naka-rectangular din si B, pwede tayo mag-add. So you have to do A plus B. So that is 1.97 plus 0.35i plus 2 plus 3i. So you will have 1.97 plus 2, which is the real part, then 0.35 plus 3, which is the imaginary part. Therefore, A plus B is 3.97 plus 3.35i. Then for the C minus D, you have to convert C into rectangular. So you will have A equals 5 cosine 30, which is equivalent to 4.33. Then b equals 5 sine 30, which is equivalent to 2.5. Therefore, c is 4.33 plus 2.5i. You have to get c minus d. So this is 4.33 plus 2.5i. This is minus, sorry for the mistake, this is minus 1 minus 4i. So you will have 4.33 minus 1, 2.5 minus negative 4. So you will have c minus d as 3.33 plus 6.5 I, and that is your c minus d in rectangular form. All you have to do is to divide your a plus b kay c minus d. So ang sabi ko kanina, para ma-simplify yung equation, all you have to do is to get yung conjugate ni denominator. Since that is plus, all you have to do is to change it to negative. Then kung ano yung denominator mo, yun din yung numerator mo. Then all you have to do is to multiply the numerator to the numerator, then the denominator to the denominator. So kapag minultiply na natin yan, you will have this equation. Kapag sinimplify mo yan, you will have this equation. Then the answer is this one. Then for the final answer, that is equivalent to 0.66 minus 0.27i. So that's all for the introduction of the complex number. I hope you learn a lot in this session. Now, if you do have any questions, just comment down your question and I will try to answer to the best of my knowledge. And that's all. Thank you and God bless.